In the rolling countryside of England lies the grand and opulent Peacock Manor, a place famed not only for its wealth, but for its magnificent gardens, where dazzling peacocks roam freely. Hercule Poirot, the world's most meticulous detective, finds himself invited to this estate for what seems to be a simple weekend of leisure. Yet, behind the laughter of the guests and the elegance of the manor, Poirot senses unease. Whispers of rivalry, old scandals, and hidden motives flutter through the halls, much like the restless wings of the birds outside. Then, a mysterious black cat begins to stalk the grounds, its appearance coinciding with strange disturbances. When a prized peacock is found dead and soon after, a guest is murdered, the tranquil beauty of the manor shatters. With only his little grey cells, Poirot must untangle secrets, lies, and a most unusual trail of clues. Chapter 1. Arrival at Peacock Manor. The countryside rolled past in a blur of green fields, hedgerows, and winding lanes. Hercule Poirot sat upright in the motor car, his gloved hands folded neatly on his lap, while Captain Hastings, at the wheel, hummed cheerfully. Poirot's keen eyes, always observant, lingered on the passing scenery with mild interest, though his thoughts were already on the destination ahead. Peacock Manor, the famed estate of Sir Reginald and Lady Eleanor Whitcomb. Magnificent grounds, old chap, Hastings said, steering carefully as the road curved. They say the manor's gardens are unmatched, and the peacocks, well, apparently, there are dozens of them strutting about like kings. Poirot tilted his head. Peacocks, mon ami, they are creatures of vanity, no, always showing off their feathers, dazzling in the sun. But do not forget, sometimes beauty hides danger. Hastings chuckled. You and your warnings, Poirot. This is simply a weekend of relaxation, a gathering of distinguished guests, good food, a little hunting perhaps, and the charm of the countryside. Surely even you can enjoy that. Poirot smiled faintly, though his moustache twitched with amusement. Relaxation, yes, but gatherings of distinguished guests, they often lead to tension, to secrets revealed, to dramas unfolding. I never trust too much laughter in old houses. It often covers whispers. The car turned through a pair of ornate iron gates, crowned with the crest of the Whitcomb family, and followed the gravel drive that wound toward the manor. The first sight of the estate was indeed breathtaking. Vast lawns rolled down to sculpted hedges, fountains sparkled in the afternoon light, and the manor itself rose proudly in the distance, an elegant Georgian structure of white stone, its windows glinting like watchful eyes, but most striking were the birds. Peacocks strolled across the lawns, their feathers trailing like silken robes, their tails fanning into jeweled wheels of turquoise, sapphire, and gold. Their cries, half eerie and half majestic, echoed faintly across the grounds. As Hastings parked the motor car, a tall butler in dark livery approached, bowing slightly. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, welcome to Peacock Manor. I am Chalmers. Lady Eleanor awaits you in the drawing room. Poirot stepped out, smoothing his coat and casting a last glance at the birds. One peacock strutted directly before him, its feathers flaring in a grand display. Poirot inclined his head, as though acknowledging a rival. Ah, Hastings, even the birds here know how to make an entrance. Inside the manor, the elegance continued. Polished oak floors, chandeliers glittering overhead, walls adorned with family portraits and landscapes. Servants moved quietly through the corridors, carrying trays or adjusting curtains, their expressions practiced and discreet. Lady Eleanor Whitcomb rose gracefully from her seat as the guests entered the drawing room. She was tall, with silver hair swept back elegantly, a gown of deep green echoing the plumage of her beloved birds. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, she said warmly, what a pleasure to welcome you. My husband and I are honored. Poirot bowed slightly. The honor is mine, madame. Your home, it has already left a strong impression. Around the room sat a handful of other guests. A striking soprano named Clara Vane, her laughter ringing like a bell. Colonel Arbuthnot, retired and red-faced, holding a brandy. A young artist, Julian Marsh, his sketchbook ever in hand. And Lady Eleanor's niece, Miss Violet, whose quiet, watchful eyes seemed to notice everything. Introductions were made, small talk flowed, and servants brought tea and cakes. Poirot observed carefully every gesture, every glance, every hesitation. Already, subtle undercurrents emerged. The colonel drank too quickly, the soprano's laugh seemed forced, the young artist sketched nervously in the corner. Only Miss Violet sat calm and composed, her gaze flicking from one guest to another with faint amusement. Then came Sir Reginald Whitcomb, entering with the authority of a man who owned everything his eyes surveyed. Broad-shouldered and commanding, he greeted his guests with booming joviality, though Poirot sensed an edge beneath the warmth. "Poirot," Sir Reginald exclaimed, "I am told you have solved the unsolvable across Europe. Well, no mysteries here, I assure you. Only fresh air, fine company, and the splendor of my peacocks. Come, you must see them at sunset. It is a sight to behold." As afternoon faded into evening, the guests strolled the gardens. The peacocks glimmered like jewels in the fading light, their cries carrying across the lawns. Poirot admired them, yet his eyes often shifted to the black cat that lingered at the edge of the path. Unlike the birds, it moved silently, its green eyes glinting as it slipped into the shadows. "Odd little creature," Hastings remarked. "Probably belongs to the servants." Poirot shook his head. "Non, Hastings, that cat it is not here by chance. Cats, they see much, they go where they please, and this one, I think, will show us more than we expect." The evening ended with dinner in the great hall. Laughter filled the air, glasses clinked, and toasts were made. Yet Poirot, sipping his wine with care, could not shake the sense that beneath the glittering facade of Peacock Manor lay secrets waiting to stir. And as the peacocks called out in the moonlit gardens, and the black cat prowled unseen, Poirot's little grey cells whispered to him, "This weekend of leisure will be anything but ordinary." Chapter 2. The mysterious cat night at Peacock Manor passed quietly for most. Yet Hercule Poirot did not sleep deeply. He awoke at intervals, listening to the faint creaks of the old house, the distant rustle of the trees beyond the windows, and the haunting cries of the peacocks echoing like restless spirits across the moonlit gardens. There was also another sound, a softer one, that caught his ear. It was the unmistakable padding of paws across the gravel below his window, followed by a low, throaty purr. At breakfast the next morning, Poirot appeared immaculate as ever, his moustache perfectly arranged, his attire crisp and spotless. Hastings joined him, cheerfully devouring eggs and toast, while the other guests trickled in with varying levels of energy. Lady Eleanor presided at the head of the long dining table, elegant and composed. "Did everyone sleep well?" she asked with a polite smile. "Like a log, ma'am," declared Colonel Arbuthnot, thumping the table with his hand, as though to emphasize his point. "Not even the peacocks kept me up." Clara Vane, the soprano, let out a delicate laugh. "Those birds are beautiful, but their voices, my goodness, they sound like a chorus of lost souls in the night." Lady Eleanor smiled indulgently. "They are creatures of beauty, not of music. One cannot expect both." Poirot sipped his coffee and spoke gently. "And yet, madame, sometimes it is the most unexpected notes that hold the greatest meaning." His remark passed with little notice, but Poirot's eyes did not miss the faint reaction of Violet, the niece, who raised her gaze sharply before looking back down at her plate. Conversation shifted to plans for the day, a tour of the gardens, sketching sessions for Julian Marsh, and an afternoon hunt proposed by Sir Reginald. Poirot politely declined the hunt, stating he had no taste for shooting at creatures who cannot defend themselves. Hastings, however, eagerly agreed, much to the Colonel's delight. After breakfast, Poirot wandered the grounds alone. The morning air was crisp, and sunlight glimmered on the dew-soaked grass. Peacocks strutted proudly, their feathers shimmering in the light, their heads held high as though aware of their own grandeur. Poirot admired them briefly before his attention turned to a flicker of movement near the hedges. The black cat it sat poised, its sleek body taut, its emerald eyes fixed not on Poirot but on the peacocks. Then, without a sound, it darted forward. The birds scattered with shrill cries, feathers scattering as they fled. The cat, satisfied with its mischief, slipped gracefully into the shadows again. Poirot followed at a measured pace. The cat led him toward the far end of the gardens, where the manicured order gave way to wilder growth. Here, tall grasses swayed, and ivy crept along the old stone walls. An unused aviary loomed nearby, its wire mesh rusted, its door ajar. Poirot paused, noting the details, a scattering of feathers inside, and something glinting faintly on the ground. Stooping, he picked up a small object, a brass button, worn and dulled. He studied it closely, slipping it into his pocket before glancing again at the aviary. The black cat was gone, but the silence of the place carried weight, as though it harbored a secret. Poirot. Hastings' voice called across the garden. There you are. We're gathering for the tour. Lady Eleanor insists we see her prized roses before the afternoon hunt. Poirot straightened. Coming, mon ami. But tell me, have you seen the black cat that wanders here? Hastings looked puzzled. Cat? Can't say I have. Are you sure it isn't just your imagination? Poirot smiled thinly. My imagination does not leave buttons in aviaries. The garden tour proved pleasant enough, though Poirot's attention drifted. Lady Eleanor spoke proudly of her roses, her fountains, her carefully designed vistas. Guests admired, exclaimed, and praised, though Poirot noticed Clara Vane was more interested in exchanging whispered words with Julian Marsh than in the flowers. Colonel Arbuthnot, meanwhile, seemed bored, muttering about the real sport of the hunt to come. As the group returned to the manor for luncheon, Poirot lingered at the edge of the lawns. His eyes tracked the black cat once more, watching as it perched on a stone wall overlooking the peacock enclosures. The bird nearest to it shrieked, feathers flaring. Poirot tilted his head thoughtfully. Later that afternoon, as the hunt party prepared to depart, Poirot remained behind. He chose instead to visit the library, a grand chamber lined with volumes of history, science, and art. Here he encountered Miss Violet, who sat quietly at a desk, sketching. Ah, mademoiselle, Poirot greeted her. You do not join the others. She smiled faintly. Hunting is not for me, Monsieur Poirot. I prefer quieter pursuits. Poirot glanced at her sketch. It was of a peacock, rendered with striking detail. But in the corner, almost hidden, she had drawn the black cat. Poirot raised his brows. You, too, have noticed our feline visitor? Violet's eyes flickered with a hint of unease. Yes, it has been around the manor for weeks now. Aunt Eleanor pretends it does not exist, but I think it unsettles her. Some say it's an omen. Black cats. You know. Poirot leaned closer, lowering his voice. And do you believe in omens, mademoiselle? She hesitated, then shook her head lightly. No, but I do believe that animals sometimes sense things we cannot. Poirot's mustache twitched. Just so. A most perceptive thought. Before Violet could reply, a sudden commotion echoed from the gardens, a sharp cry, followed by the frantic clamour of voices. Poirot and Violet exchanged a glance, then hurried toward the source of the noise. Outside, guests and servants were already gathered. A peacock lay sprawled upon the grass, its feathers torn, its body unnaturally still. Clara Vane gasped and clutched her throat. Julian Marsh turned pale, and even the boisterous colonel fell silent. Lady Eleanor pushed through the crowd, her face ashen. One of my birds killed, she whispered, as though unable to believe it. Poirot bent down, examining the creature carefully. His eyes narrowed as he brushed his gloved fingers along the feathers. Nong, he said softly, almost to himself. This is no mere accident. Something more is at play here. And from the edge of the trees, the black cat sat watching, its green eyes unblinking, as though it alone knew the truth. Chapter 3. A disturbance at Midnight House was still. Midnight had wrapped Peacock Manor in its silken cloak, muffling the grandeur of the estate in deep silence. Only the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the distant rustle of wind through the trees disturbed the quiet. Yet Poirot, ever alert even in rest, stirred in his bed. Something he could not say what had unsettled him. Then came the cry. It pierced the silence, shrill and eerie, echoing through the corridors. For a fleeting second Poirot thought it was one of the peacocks, the ghostly call drifting in from the gardens. But this sound was sharper, tinged with panic, and followed by the crashing of footsteps on gravel outside. Poirot was out of bed in an instant, adjusting his robe and slippers with characteristic precision. He opened his door to find Captain Hastings emerging from the opposite room, hair-tousled, eyes wide. "Good heavens, Poirot! Did you hear that?" Hastings whispered urgently. "Mais oui, mon ami. Something is amiss. Come, let us investigate." Together they moved swiftly down the corridor and descended the grand staircase. The lamps had been dimmed for the night, and the shadows stretched long across the walls. As they reached the main hall, they nearly collided with Lady Eleanor, who appeared equally alarmed, her nightgown and shawl hastily thrown on. "It came from the gardens," she gasped. "I heard something dreadful." Poirot inclined his head. "Then let us waste no time, madame." They hurried through the French doors, leading to the terrace, and stepped into the cool night air. The moon was high, casting its silver glow over the lawns. The peacocks were restless, their cries rising and falling in waves, as though echoing some hidden distress. And then, near the fountain, a cluster of servants and guests had already gathered, their lanterns bobbing like willow. The wisps in the darkness. At the center of the commotion lay another peacock, its feathers scattered across the grass like shards of colored glass. The bird was unmistakably dead, its neck twisted unnaturally. Gasps and murmurs filled the night. "What on earth is going on here?" bellowed Colonel Arbuthnot, pushing his way forward in a dressing gown. "Two birds in as many days, it can't be coincidence." Clara Vane clutched her robe tightly around her shoulders. "It's horrible. First yesterday's poor creature, and now this. It feels like a curse." Poirot knelt gracefully beside the fallen bird, examining it with his usual care. He touched nothing, but his eyes sharp and unyielding missed no detail. He noticed the faint indentation, the bird's chest, the slight glisten of moisture on the grass nearby. "Not a curse, mademoiselle," Poirot murmured. "But perhaps a message." Hastings echoed, baffled. Poirot rose slowly. "We must consider, mon ami, who would wish to disturb the peace of Peacock Manor and why they would choose to begin with the birds." Lady Eleanor pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "This is dreadful. My poor birds. But surely this is only the work of some wild animal." Poirot's moustache twitched. "An animal, madame, perhaps. Yet why then do I find traces of water here, fresh water sprinkled deliberately across the grass?" The guests looked at one another uneasily. The night air seemed colder now, thick with unease. At that moment, a new sound cut through the murmurs, the low, haunting cry of the black cat. From the edge of the trees, its green eyes gleamed like twin lanterns, watching silently. The servants crossed themselves, and Clara let out another gasp. "There it is again," she cried. "That dreadful animal, it's a bad omen, I tell you." Poirot regarded the cat calmly. "No, mademoiselle. The cat, he is but a witness. The omen lies not in his presence, but in what he chooses to show us." Sir Reginald arrived then, his booming voice cutting across the gathering. "What's all this racket at midnight? I'll have no hysteria in my house." But when his eyes fell on the dead peacock, his face paled. For a moment, his bravado faltered, though he quickly recovered. "Blasted nuisance. Some fox, no doubt. Chalmers, see that the grounds are secured in the morning." "Yes, sir," the butler murmured. Though Poirot noted the man's tight expression, Poirot stepped forward. "Sir Reginald, with respect, I do not believe this is the work of a fox. The manner of death, the timing, the deliberate disturbance, it suggests design, not chance." "Nonsense," barked the colonel. "We're not in one of your detective novels, Poirot. It's an animal, pure and simple." Poirot gave a small smile. "Perhaps, colonel, but if it were an animal, I should not expect to find human footprints near the scene." He gestured delicately toward the grass, where faint impressions were visible in the moonlight, too small for a man. Perhaps, yet unmistakably deliberate. The group fell silent. Unease growing like a shadow over the gathering. Poirot turned to Lady Eleanor. "Madame, I suggest that the doors and windows remain locked tonight. No one is to wander the gardens until morning. And tomorrow, I'll speak to each of your guests in turn. For though the death of a bird may seem a small thing, I fear it is but the opening note of a darker melody. Lady Eleanor nodded weakly, her composure strained. Yes, yes, Monsieur Poirot. Whatever you think best. As the guests dispersed reluctantly back to their rooms, Poirot lingered by the fountain, gazing once more at the silent bird. Hastings joined him, frowning. You think there's more to this than someone tormenting the peacocks? Poirot's eyes glimmered in the moonlight. Mais oui, Hastings. These are not random acts. Someone here plays a dangerous game. And they begin with the birds because they know it will unsettle, disturb, and distract. Mark my words, before long, the true target will not be the creatures of the garden, but one of us, from the trees. The black cat gave another long, mournful cry, as if to echo Poirot's warning. Chapter 4. Whispers in the drawing-room. While morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Peacock Manor, but the brightness could not dispel the tension that hung in the air. Servants moved quietly, whispering. They passed along the corridors, while guests gathered in uneasy clusters. The second dead peacock had unsettled everyone, and though Sir Reginald dismissed it as nonsense, even he looked weary when he appeared at breakfast. Poirot entered the dining room, his steps measured, his attire immaculate as ever. Hastings followed, scanning the room with curiosity. Lady Eleanor was absent, claiming a headache, but the other guests were present. Clara Vane stirred her tea with unnecessary vigour. Colonel Arbuthnot wolfed down his bacon, as though to show that no bird alive or dead could ruin his appetite. Julian Marsh sketched distractedly in the corner, and Miss Violet sat silently, her gaze lowered to her plate. "Good morning, Miss Amos," Poirot greeted warmly, though his sharp eyes took note of every gesture. "Did we all sleep peacefully?" His question hung pointedly in the air. Clara let out a nervous laugh. "Peacefully? With that dreadful scene last night, I hardly closed my eyes." The Colonel harumphed. "Nonsense. Storm in a teacup. The servants will deal with the carcass, and that's the end of it." "Perhaps, Colonel," Poirot said gently. "And yet, even small storms can signal larger weather." The remark earned him a puzzled frown, but Poirot did not elaborate. Instead, he finished his coffee and suggested to Hastings that they retire to the drawing-room after breakfast. There, by the warmth of the fire, he began his quiet inquiries. The first to drift in was Julian Marsh, his sketch-book tucked beneath his arm. He seemed relieved to see Poirot alone. "Monsieur Poirot," he began, lowering his voice, "I must tell you I heard something strange last night." Before all the commotion, Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Go on, monsieur." Julian glanced nervously toward the door. "I was in my room, sketching by candlelight. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the corridor. Light, quick, almost cautious. I thought perhaps it was a servant, but when I peeked through the keyhole, I could not see who it was. Only a shadow moving toward the terrace doors." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And you told no one?" Julian shook his head. I wasn't sure it meant anything." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Everything means something, monsieur, even shadows." When Julian departed, Clara Vane entered, her perfume arriving a moment before her. She threw herself onto a velvet chair, sighing dramatically. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, I cannot bear it here any longer. The atmosphere is dreadful, simply dreadful. Those ghastly birds, that horrid cat prowling about, and now deaths in the garden. It feels cursed." Poirot observed her closely. "Mademoiselle, fear is understandable. But tell me, did you notice anything unusual last night?" Clara's eyes flickered. "Unusual? Only the screams, of course. And that cat, oh, how it sat there, staring as though it knew everything. I hate cats, Monsieur Poirot. Nasty, silent creatures." Poirot inclined his head. "Yet sometimes, it is the silent creatures who notice what others do not." Clara looked uneasy, twisting her handkerchief. Poirot noted the movement, but pressed her no further. Later, Colonel Arbuthnot stomped into the room, brandy already in hand, despite the early hour. "I suppose you're sniffing about, Poirot, but you'll find nothing. Some vermin got the bird, that's all." Poirot raised a brow. "You are certain, Colonel?" "Of course I am. Always had peacocks on my estate, back in Kent, stupid birds. Attract foxes, stoats, even dogs. This is no mystery, Poirot, it's nature. Poirot's voice was calm, but his eyes glittered. Nature leaves certain traces, Colonel, yet the footprints I saw were not those of a fox. Tell me, where were you at midnight? The Colonel bristled. In my room, asleep, like any sensible man. Did anyone see you? The Colonel's face darkened. Are you accusing me, sir? Poirot spread his hands. Not at all, Colonel. I only seek clarity. The older man muttered and stormed out, leaving behind the faint smell of spirits. Hastings raised his brows. Touchy fellow, isn't he? Oui, Hastings, Poirot murmured. Touchy, and perhaps too eager to dismiss. Finally, Miss Violet entered. She moved quietly, her presence calm amid the unease. She sat across from Poirot, her hands folded neatly in her lap. You wish to speak with me, Monsieur Poirot? She asked. Only if you wish to speak with me, mademoiselle, Poirot replied gently. Tell me, what did you see or hear last night? She hesitated, her dark eyes meeting his. I saw the cat again. It was near the fountain before anyone else arrived. It was staring at the peacock, as though it knew what was about to happen. Then it ran off, toward the old aviary. Poirot regarded her closely. And you believe the cat is involved? Violet shook her head. No, I think the cat is a distraction. Someone wants us to notice it, to blame it. Poirot's mustache twitched approvingly. "'Tis bien, mademoiselle. That is a most intelligent observation." Before he could ask further, Sir Reginald entered with Lady Eleanor on his arm. The hostess, pale but composed, addressed the gathering. "Monsieur Poirot, I trust you are not alarming our guests with dark theories. We will not let silly accidents spoil our weekend." Poirot bowed slightly. "Of course, Lady Eleanor, yet I cannot help but observe that what seems an accident may in truth be design. And design, madame, always has a hand to guide it." Her eyes flashed briefly with irritation, but she said nothing more. As the guests drifted away, Poirot turned to Hastings. "You see, mon ami, already the threads appear. Each guest has spoken, and in their words I hear more than they intend to reveal. There are footsteps in the night. There are fears of omens. There are denials too strong to be believed. And always the black cat is present." Hastings frowned. "So what's your theory?" Poirot smiled faintly, gazing toward the gardens, where the peacocks shimmered in the sunlight. "My theory, Hastings, is that someone here plays a careful game. The peacocks are but pawns. The true move that is yet to come." At that moment, from the distant aviary, the cry of the black cat echoed once again, long, low, and haunting. Poirot's little grey cells stirred with certainty. The game had only just begun. Chapter 5. The second tragedy. The atmosphere at Peacock Manor had grown taut, like a violin string stretched to the breaking point. Guests spoke in hushed tones, glances darting nervously toward the windows, where the peacocks still strutted across the lawns as though nothing had changed. Yet inside the house, unease stalked the corridors. The deaths of 2 birds could be explained away as misfortune, at least. That was Sir Reginald's position, but Poirot knew better, and somewhere deep down, Lady Eleanor seemed to know it too. Though she said little, her composure maintained with brittle determination. That evening, dinner was a strained affair. The long table glittered with crystal glasses and silver, but conversation faltered. Clara Vane complained of headaches. Colonel Arbuthnot drowned his unease in wine. Julian Marsh pushed food about his plate distractedly, sketchbook ever near his elbow. Miss Violet remained quiet, watchful, her expression unreadable. Poirot sat calmly, observing each face as though it were a puzzle piece waiting to be fitted into place. Halfway through the meal, the cry of the black cat drifted through the open window. Clara gave a startled gasp, while Sir Reginald swore under his breath. That infernal animal, he growled. Charmers, have it caught and disposed of at once. I'll not have my household terrorized by a stray. Yes, sir, the butler replied quietly, though his eyes flickered with something. Poirot did not miss hesitation. Dinner ended quickly, guests retreating early to their rooms. Poirot, however, lingered in the drawing room, sipping a small liqueur and speaking quietly with Hastings. The tension, Hastings, grows unbearable. Soon, it will snap. Hastings frowned. You think someone's going to, good Lord, move against a person? Poirot's moustache twitched gravely. It is inevitable. The birds were only the beginning, mon ami. Symbols, diversions, perhaps even warnings. But when one begins a pattern of destruction, it rarely stops at animals. The words proved prophetic. Near midnight, a scream shattered the silence of the house. It was no bird this time. No eerie call from the gardens. It was a woman's scream, sharp and human. Poirot and Hastings rushed from the drawing room, joined by other guests pouring from their rooms in confusion and fear. The cry had come from the east wing, near the gallery. Servants with lanterns ran ahead, their light spilling across the polished floors. Poirot arrived first at the scene, where Clara Vane lay crumpled against the wall, her face ghostly pale, one hand pressed against her chest. Her eyes fluttered as she gasped for breath. "My God!" Violet exclaimed, kneeling beside her. "What happened?" Clara tried to speak, but only managed a faint whisper. The cat." Before her voice faltered, Poirot bent low, his gaze sharp. He noticed at once the faint scratches across Clara's arm, the overturned vase nearby, and most telling the thin line of feathers scattered on the carpet, as though deliberately placed. "Fetch Dr. Myers at once," Lady Eleanor commanded, her usual calm cracking. Servants hurried off, but Poirot shook his head slowly. "Alas, madame, I fear it is too late." Within minutes, Clara Vane was still. The soprano who had filled rooms with her voice now lay silent, her lifeless body casting a pall over the gathering. The group stood in stunned silence. Colonel Arbuthnot muttered an oath, Julian Marsh turned ashen, and Violet bowed her head, her hands trembling faintly. Sir Reginald, however, remained rigid, his jaw tight. "This is outrageous. An accident, nothing more." "She must have fallen," struck her head. Poirot's eyes glimmered coldly. "Non, monsieur. This was no accident. Clara Vane has been murdered." The words fell heavy in the room. Murdered. Hastings echoed, aghast. Poirot rose, his expression grave. "Examine, if you will, the scratches upon her arm to deliberate to be the result of a fall, and these feathers placed here, as though to taunt. The murderer has staged this scene carefully, weaving the motif of the peacocks into his crime. It is a signature, Hastings. A calling card." Lady Eleanor's face drained of colour. "But who would do such a thing?" "That, madame," Poirot said quietly, "is what we must discover. But mark my words, the killer is among us, inside this very house." A murmur of fear rippled through the group. Colonel Arbuthnot barked, "Nonsense. Could have been that blasted cat. The woman was hysterical about it, probably tripped in fright." Poirot turned his sharp gaze upon him. "Do not be so quick to dismiss, Colonel. The cat may be many things, a distraction, a witness, perhaps even a tool. But it is not the hand that struck this blow. The hand belongs to one of us." Violet spoke softly, her voice trembling but steady. "You said yesterday the peacocks were only the beginning." "You were right." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "Yes, mademoiselle. The pattern now escalates, and unless we act swiftly, I fear there will be more tragedies to come." Dr. Myers arrived too late, confirming what Poirot already knew. Clara Vane was gone. Her body was carried respectfully to a guest chamber, and the shaken household slowly dispersed. Though sleep was impossible for most, in the silence that followed, Poirot stood at the window, gazing out at the moonlit gardens. The peacocks shifted restlessly among the shadows, their feathers shimmering in the pale light, and upon the wall, poised and silent, the black cat sat once more, its green eyes gleaming like emeralds. Poirot whispered to himself, "So, mon chatouin, you watch, you follow, you linger. Perhaps you know more than anyone here. But it is not you who plots, it is one who hides among the peacocks, clothed in beauty, concealing claws beneath feathers." Behind him, Hastings spoke in a hushed voice. "Poirot, do you really think the murderer will strike again?" Poirot's moustache bristled. "Mais oui, Hastings. Murder, once begun, is like music, it follows a rhythm. And here, in this house of Peacocks, the melody is far from over. Chapter 6. The cat's clue. Dawn that followed Clara Vane's death broke cold and grey, as though the very sky mourned. The house stirred reluctantly, its usual morning routine subdued. Servants moved with hushed voices, and the guests appeared pale, their eyes ringed with sleeplessness. Peacock Manor, once proud and serene, now felt like a stage upon which a sinister play unfolded. Hercule Poirot was already awake, his attire impeccable, his moustache perfectly groomed. He sat at the small writing desk in his chamber, jotting meticulous notes in his pocket diary. Every detail of the past days, the dead peacocks, the midnight disturbances, the whispered confessions was written down. Poirot trusted memory, but he trusted order more. A knock came at his door. Hastings entered, looking weary but determined. "Poirot, I don't like this business. A woman's dead now, and the whole place feels, well, cursed." Poirot raised a finger. "Non, Hastings, not cursed, murdered. There is a difference, and a vital one. A curse is vague and senseless. Murder, mon ami, is always deliberate. Someone has chosen their victim carefully." Hastings frowned. "But why Clara? She seemed harmless enough." Poirot closed his diary. "That is the question, Hastings, and to answer it, we must follow every clue, even those left by animals, as if on cue." A sharp cry sounded from the gardens below. Poirot crossed to the window, peering out. The black cat sat upon the stone balustrade, its emerald eyes fixed intently on the lawn. Poirot's gaze followed the direction of its stare and saw, near the aviary, something glint faintly in the morning light. "Come, Hastings," Poirot said briskly. "Our feline friend is pointing the way." They descended into the gardens, the air crisp with dew. The peacocks moved restlessly, their calls echoing across the estate, as though disturbed by unseen tensions. The black cat leapt gracefully from its perch and darted toward the aviary, tail flicking like a banner. Poirot and Hastings followed at a more dignified pace. The aviary loomed ahead, its iron frame rusted, ivy creeping along its sides. Inside, broken perches and scattered feathers hinted at years of neglect. Poirot stepped carefully through the open door, his eyes sharp. At once he noticed it, the glint he had seen from the window. It was a small brooch, shaped like a peacock's feather, set with tiny blue and green stones. Poirot lifted it delicately with his handkerchief. "Good heavens," Hastings murmured. "That's no trinket. Looks expensive." "Indeed," Poirot agreed. "And more than that, it is out of place. Why should such a piece of jewelry be found here, in an abandoned aviary?" He examined it more closely. The clasp was bent, as though torn suddenly from its wearer. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "This, Hastings, is no accident. Someone was here last night, before or after poor Clara met her end. In their haste, they dropped this. But whose is it?" Hastings asked. Poirot smiled faintly. "That, mon ami, is what we shall discover. Jewelry, you see, is like handwriting. It often betrays its owner." They left the aviary, but Poirot's attention lingered on the black cat, now seated calmly at the entrance, tail curled neatly around its paws. He bent slightly, addressing it almost as though it were human. "Merci, mon petit. You have shown us much. Perhaps you know still more." The cat blinked slowly, unperturbed, before slipping away into the hedges. Back in the manor, Poirot requested that Lady Eleanor summon the guests to the drawing-room once again. The atmosphere was strained when they gathered, faces drawn, eyes wary. Sir Reginald stood stiffly, jaw clenched. Violet sat quietly, hands folded. Julian fidgeted with his sketchbook. Colonel Arbuthnot scowled, and Lady Eleanor attempted dignity, but could not conceal the tremor in her voice. "My friends," Poirot began, holding up the brooch delicately, "this morning I discovered this near the aviary. A fine piece, no, but it is not the place of such an ornament to be found abandoned in the dirt. I ask who among you recognizes it." There was silence. Eyes darted, but no one spoke. Then, reluctantly, Lady Eleanor inhaled sharply. "It is mine," she admitted, her voice tight. "It must have fallen when I walked in the gardens yesterday evening." Poirot's brow lifted slightly. "Is that so, madame?" "Curious, for the clasp is bent as though torn by force. Tell me, why should you visit the aviary, long unused, after dark?" Colour rose to Lady Eleanor's cheeks. "I was restless, that is all. The house felt oppressive. I wandered, and perhaps I lost it there. Surely there is nothing sinister in that." Poirot inclined his head politely, but his eyes remained sharp. "Perhaps not. And yet, madame, timing is everything. A woman is murdered, her body discovered within hours of your late night walk. Coincidence? We shall see." Sir Reginald bristled. "Poirot, this is outrageous. My wife is above suspicion." Poirot's moustache twitched. "No one is above suspicion, monsieur. In murder, all must be considered." Violet's quiet voice broke in. "But if it was Aunt Eleanor's brooch, then surely she would not be foolish enough to leave it there, knowing it could incriminate her." Poirot turned to her with a small smile. "An excellent point, mademoiselle. Which means either Lady Eleanor speaks the truth or someone seeks to cast suspicion upon her." Murmurs rippled through the room. Colonel Arbuthnot muttered about foreign meddling, while Julian Marsh stared at the brooch with something like recognition before quickly lowering his gaze. Poirot tucked the jewel away carefully. "For now, I make no accusations, but I tell you this: the murderer is clever, yes, but not clever enough. They leave behind small traces, and each trace will lead, inevitably, to the truth." As the meeting ended, Hastings whispered, "Poirot, do you really suspect Lady Eleanor?" Poirot's eyes glimmered. "I suspect everyone, Hastings, until the facts clear them. But remember this: murderers often attempt to weave beauty into their crimes. Here, with peacocks and jewels, there is a pattern, an artistry. An artistry always leaves a signature." That night, a silence fell once more over Peacock Manor. The black cat prowled unseen among the hedges, its eyes glinting like green fire, and Hercule Poirot, lying awake, felt certain the next move in this deadly game would come soon. Chapter 7. Secrets of the Aviary of Morning. Hercule Poirot revealed the discovery of Lady Eleanor's brooch. Peacock Manor was restless. Guests avoided one another in the corridors, servants whispered in corners, and even the peacocks seemed unsettled, their cries louder, harsher, like warnings carried on the wind. Poirot, however, was calm. He had spent the early hours walking the gardens, his eyes noting the smallest details: the trampled grass near the aviary, the disturbed soil along the hedges, and the faint traces of powder on the steps leading to the bird enclosures. When he returned to the terrace, Hastings was waiting. "Well, Poirot, the atmosphere is enough to make a man's skin crawl. Everyone's on edge. Sir Reginald blusters. Lady Eleanor looks like she's hiding something. The Colonel drinks too much, and Julian keeps sketching the cat, though it's some kind of news." Poirot chuckled softly. "Oui, Hastings. In a house such as this, everyone hides something. The art lies in distinguishing between secrets of the heart and secrets of the crime." Their conversation was interrupted by the aviary keeper, a wiry man named Gibbons, who approached with his cap in hand. His face was lined with worrying. "Begging your pardon, sirs," he said, bowing slightly, "but I think you ought to know the birds aren't right." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Not right, monsieur. Explain. S'il vous plaît." Gibbons twisted his cap nervously. "They're restless. They won't eat their grain. The peacocks scream at night worse than ever, as though something's been disturbing them. I've kept them near 20 years, sir, and never seen the like." Poirot leaned closer. "Have you noticed anything unusual about their feed, or in the aviary itself?" The man nodded. "That's just it. The feed sacks were tampered with, at least I think so. Some kind of powder sprinkled in. Not enough to kill them outright, but enough to make them uneasy." Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. "A powder, you say? 'Tis interessant." Gibbons lowered his voice. "And last night, I saw someone near the aviary. Couldn't make out who, but it wasn't one of the servants. Too well dressed for that. They slipped away when they saw me coming." Poirot's moustache twitched with satisfaction. "Merci, monsieur. You have given me much to think about. After Gibbons departed, Hastings frowned. So the birds are being poisoned. But why would anyone go to the trouble of unsettling peacocks? Poirot spread his hands delicately. Because, mon ami, symbols matter. The murderer is weaving a tapestry. The peacocks are not victims by chance, they are chosen. Their beauty, their vanity, their cries in the night, they all serve to create unease, to build the stage for the true crime. Inside the manor, Poirot sought out Julian Marsh, who sat sketching near the library window. His pencil moved quickly, producing yet another image of the black cat. "You have talent, monsieur," Poirot said softly, glancing at the page. "But I wonder, why do you sketch always the cat, and never the peacocks?" Julian flushed, snapping the book shut. "The cat fascinates me, that's all. It seems knowing, like it's part of the mystery." Poirot tilted his head. "Perhaps it is. Tell me, monsieur, do you also sketch what you see at night?" Julian hesitated. "Sometimes. Last night, I drew the gardens. I couldn't sleep." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "And did you see anything unusual?" Julian bit his lip, then shook his head quickly. "No, nothing." But Poirot noted the tremor in his voice, and the way his hand tightened around the sketchbook. He decided not to press further for now. That afternoon, Poirot asked Lady Eleanor for permission to examine the old aviary more thoroughly. She granted it, though with visible reluctance. Together with Hastings, Poirot returned to the structure, where the black cat once again lingered like a sentinel. Inside, Poirot knelt carefully, examining the corners. His gloved fingers brushed across a faint residue of powder near the feed bins. He sniffed it cautiously, his face tightening. Arsenic, Hastings, but diluted. Not enough to kill quickly, only to disturb, to weaken. Very clever. Hastings blanched. "Good Lord, so the birds were poisoned deliberately?" Poirot nodded. "Yes. And what is more, it was done with great care. Whoever is behind this understands not only murder, but psychology. They knew that unsettling the birds would unsettle the household, and into that chaos they placed their crime." As he rose, Poirot's eyes fell upon something lodged between two wooden beams. He retrieved it delicately. A scrap of torn fabric, dark blue velvet, frayed at the edge. He held it up to the light. "Another clue, mon ami. Small, but significant. Velvet of fine quality. It belongs to someone in this house." They returned to the manor, where Poirot sought out Lady Eleanor once more. She received him in the music room, her hands clasped tightly around a lace handkerchief. "Madame," Poirot said gently, "forgive my intrusion, but I must ask, were you aware that your aviary had been tampered with?" Her face tightened. "No, I rarely visit it these days. It holds memories, madame." She hesitated, then spoke quietly. "It was once my husband's pride. He kept exotic birds, rare species. But there was an accident years ago, a fire. Many of the birds perished. Since then, I have avoided it. It brings back grief." Poirot bowed slightly. "Merci, madame. Grief leaves shadows, but it also leaves traces of truth." As he departed, Poirot thought carefully. The aviary was no random stage. It was tied to the Whitcombs' past, a symbol of loss and vanity. And now, once again, it had become the center of death. That evening, as the house settled into uneasy silence, Poirot confided in Hastings. "The murderer weaves with care, Hastings. They choose their stage with precision. The aviary, the birds, the brooch, the velvet scrap, they are pieces of a puzzle, and I begin to see the outline of the picture." Hastings leaned forward eagerly. "Then you know who it is?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Not yet, but soon, very soon. Tonight, perhaps, we shall have another move in this deadly game." As if to prove his words, the black cat appeared once more on the terrace wall, staring into the manor with unblinking eyes. Its cry echoed through the night, low, mournful, and strangely human. Poirot listened, his little grey cells alive with certainty. The cat had led him to the truth before. It would lead him again. Chapter 8. Suspicions and Red Herrings. Beak Manor was no longer a house of elegance. It had become a cage. Every guest knew it, though none would say it aloud. Doors were locked, Servants kept to the shadows, and conversation was clipped, filled with suspicion. The death of Clara Vane had shaken the household, but what unnerved them more was Poirot's calm certainty that the murderer still walked among them. Poirot, for his part, did not allow the tension to cloud his purpose. That morning, he requested a private audience with each guest in turn. Hastings sat by his side, taking notes and frowning at every contradiction. Colonel Arbuthnot Colonel entered first, shoulders squared, face flushed with indignation. "Really, Poirot, this is all absurd. Questioning us as though we were criminals. I've nothing to hide." Poirot regarded him coolly. "Then it will not trouble you, Colonel, if I ask where you were at the time of poor Clara Vane's death." "In my room," Arbuthnot snapped. "Asleep." "I've said it before, yet no one saw you," Poirot murmured. "And I find it curious that you dismiss the deaths of the Peacocks so readily, as though you wished to close the matter before it began." The Colonel bristled. "Birds are birds, man. Nuisances. You're making a mountain out of a molehill." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Or perhaps, Colonel, you feared that too much attention to the birds would uncover something you wish to remain hidden." Arbuthnot stood abruptly. "I'll not sit here and be insulted." He stormed out, leaving Hastings muttering, "Touchy fellow. Almost too defensive, eh, Poirot?" "Oui, Hastings. But being loud does not make one guilty. It only makes one careless." Julian arrived next, pale and nervous, his sketchbook clutched tightly. Poirot gestured for him to sit. "Monsieur Marsh, your art is most revealing," Poirot said softly. "You sketch always the cat. Why?" Julian's fingers tightened around the book. It fascinates me. The way it appears everywhere, watching. It feels symbolic." "Symbolic of what, monsieur?" Julian hesitated, then whispered, "Of death." Poirot leaned closer. "And yet, it was not the cat that killed Clara. Tell me, what did you see that night?" Julian's face drained of color. "I heard something. A woman's voice, raised in argument, in the gallery. Then a crash. I didn't dare leave my room." "Whose voice?" Poirot pressed. Julian shook his head. "I don't know. It was too muffled. But it wasn't Clara's." Poirot's eyes glimmered. "Merci, monsieur. You have been more helpful than you realize." Lady Eleanor entered. Her composure was strained, but intact. Poirot held up the torn velvet scrap he had found in the aviary. "Madame, does this belong to you?" She glanced at it briefly, then shook her head. "No, I do not own velvet of that shade." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "You answered very quickly, madame. Too quickly, perhaps. Are you certain?" Her lips tightened. "I am certain. Now, if you will excuse me, this constant suspicion is intolerable." As she swept out, Hastings muttered, "She's hiding something." Poirot nodded. "Oui, but what she hides may not be murder, it may be pride, or shame, or a secret long buried. We must not mistake one for the other." Violet Whitcomb-Belit entered calmly, her expression unreadable. She sat gracefully, folding her hands. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said gently, "you are the quietest among us, and yet I think you see the most. Tell me, what do you believe happened?" She met his gaze steadily. "I believe someone in this house wanted Clara Vane silenced. She was vain, dramatic, but she was also observant. Perhaps she saw something she was not meant to see." Poirot inclined his head. "An excellent deduction. And do you know what that something might be?" Violet's eyes flickered, just for a moment, before she replied, "No, Monsieur Poirot, but I think you already suspect." Poirot smiled faintly. "Perhaps, mademoiselle, but suspicion is not proof. Proof, I must find." Sir Reginald Finlay. Sir Reginald himself entered, blustering as always. "I'll not tolerate this much longer, Poirot. My household is in uproar, and you only feed it with your endless questions." Poirot rose, his small frame steady against the taller man's fury. "Sir Reginald, a woman lies dead under your roof. Another guest may be next. Would you rather I remained silent?" Reginald's jaw tightened. "I will not have scandal. Do you understand? My reputation, my estate, they must remain untouched." Poirot's eyes glimmered. "Even at the cost of truth." Reginald's silence was answer enough. When the interviews were complete, Poirot and Hastings withdrew to the terrace. Hastings looked perplexed. Well, Poirot, they all seem suspicious in one way or another. The Colonel's temper, Lady Eleanor's secrets, Julian's nerves, Violet's evasions, Sir Reginald's bluster. I don't know what to think. Poirot smiled softly. That is the mark of a clever murderer, Hastings. They create confusion, scattering feathers in every direction, like the peacocks themselves. But among these red herrings lies the truth, and the cat, mon ami. It circles ever closer to it, as if on cue. The black cat appeared once more, leaping onto the balustrade. In its mouth it carried something small. Poirot bent to take it, a shred of paper, damp but legible. On it, scrawled in hurried script, were the words, "Meet me at the aviary, midnight." Poirot's eyes narrowed. Voila! The game grows dangerous. The aviary is not only a place of secrets. Hastings, it is the stage upon which the final act is prepared. From the gardens, the peacocks cried out, their voices harsh against the twilight. Hastings shivered. It feels as though the house itself is warning us. Poirot tucked the paper into his pocket. Non, mon ami. It is not the house that warns us. It is the murderer. And soon, very soon, they will strike again. Chapter 9. Poirot's little experiment atmosphere in Peacock Manor was like the charged stillness before a storm. Clara Vane was gone. And yet Poirot knew the murderer was not finished. Every guest felt it too. Suspicion clung to the air like smoke. And the cries of the peacocks outside were no longer merely eerie, they were ominous. That afternoon, Poirot sat by the library fire with Hastings, his fingers steepled, eyes distant in thought. On the table before him is the scrap of velvet, Lady Eleanor's brooch, and the damp note carried by the black cat. Hastings broke the silence. So, Poirot, you think the note was written by Clara? A meeting at the aviary at midnight that would explain why she was there. Poirot nodded slowly. It is possible, Hastings, but more likely, it was written to her. Someone lured her there. A rendezvous, perhaps a promise of revelation. Instead, it became her death. Hastings frowned. Then the killer may try again. Poirot's mustache twitched. Ah, mon ami, you anticipate me. That is precisely why tonight we shall set a little trap. The plan. Poirot requested Lady Eleanor to gather the household in the drawing-room after dinner. The guests sat uneasily, their nerves frayed. Sir Reginald blustered. Violet sat pale, but composed. Julian clutched his sketchbook, and the Colonel drained yet another glass of port. Poirot rose, his voice calm but commanding. Mesdames et messieurs, last night I discovered a note. It called for a meeting at the aviary at midnight. The note is evidence that Clara Vane was lured to her death. Tonight, I intend to return to the aviary at that same hour, to see who else appears. A ripple of unease spread through the room. Lady Eleanor's face stiffened. Julian's hands trembled. Violet's eyes flickered with some private thought. Poirot smiled faintly. Of course, I will not be alone. I will observe from the shadows, as will Hastings, and perhaps, in the dead of night, our murderer will reveal themselves. Outrageous, barked Colonel Arbuthnot. You'll terrify the ladies with this melodrama. Poirot inclined his head. Better a little fright tonight, Colonel, than another death tomorrow. Midnight at the aviary. Hours crept by. The house fell silent, its lamps dimmed, its corridors echoing with every footstep. At midnight, Poirot and Hastings slipped quietly into the gardens. The night was cool, the moon casting a pale glow over the lawns. The aviary loomed ahead, its wire mesh glinting faintly. Creepy place, isn't it? Hastings muttered. Poirot raised a finger. Shh, Hastings. We must listen, not speak. They concealed themselves behind a cluster of hedges, from where they could see the aviary clearly. The peacocks rustled uneasily, their feathers shimmering like ghosts in the moonlight. Minutes passed in silence. Then footsteps, light, cautious, moving quickly across the gravel. A figure approached the aviary, cloaked in shadow. Poirot leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The figure paused at the door, glancing around nervously. Then, From the opposite side, another figure appeared, equally stealthy. Hastings gasped. Two of them. The first figure slipped inside the aviary, lantern in hand. The second lingered outside, watching. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Voila! The murderer does not act alone, or at least, not without a witness, inside the aviary. The lantern flickered, casting long shadows. Poirot could see the figure bending near the feed bins, sprinkling something powder, perhaps. The birds shrieked and scattered, their cries piercing the night. Then, suddenly, the second figure gave a sharp whistle. The one inside froze, dropped the lantern, and fled through the opposite door. Both vanished into the darkness. Poirot rose at once. Come, Hastings. They hurried to the aviary. The lantern still burned weakly on the ground. Poirot bent and examined the feed bin. A fine dust coated the grain arsenic, just as before. Good Lord! Hastings breathed. So it's true the birds are being poisoned deliberately. Poirot's moustache bristled. Yes, Hastings, and more, it is not mere cruelty. It is rehearsal. The killer experiments with poison, testing its strength, its subtlety. Clara Vane was the first human victim. She will not be the last. The aftermath back in the manor. Poirot addressed the household once more. His voice carried a weight that silenced all protest. Mes amis, last night, two of you visited the aviary. One placed poison in the feed. The other acted as sentinel. I did not yet see your faces, but I will. Already, I know enough. You think yourselves clever. Oui. But murder is never clever. It always leaves traces. Sir Reginald slammed his fist on the table. This is intolerable. You accuse my guests without proof. Poirot raised a hand. Non, monsieur. I do not accuse, I observe. Proof will come. Already, it grows stronger. The brooch, the velvet scrap, the note, the powder. And now, the midnight visit. Violet's calm voice cut through the silence. If you saw them, why not stop them then and there? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Because, mademoiselle, sometimes it is better to let the bird fly into the net of its own accord. The murderer grows bolder. Soon, they will make the mistake that reveals everything. Hastings leaned close and whispered, So what's the next step, Poirot? Poirot smiled faintly, his moustache curling. Patience, Hastings. Tonight we witnessed an experiment. Tomorrow, we shall set one of our own. And then, mon ami, the truth will come. From the gardens, as if on cue, the black cat cried once more a long, low wail that echoed through the halls. Poirot listened, nodding slowly. Yes, my little cat, you, too, know the truth. And soon, so shall we all. Chapter 10. The final Both drawing room of Peacock Manor was hushed, the heavy curtains drawn against the morning light. Guests sat in tense silence, each one avoiding the other's gaze. The atmosphere was brittle, as though one wrong word might shatter it entirely. Poirot stood before the fireplace, his small frame straight, his eyes sharp and glimmering with certainty. Hastings hovered nearby, notebook in hand, as eager as the rest to hear the truth. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice calm. The time has come to end this charade. A woman lies dead. Birds have been slaughtered. Fear has walked these halls like a shadow. But fear, like shadow, disappears when one brings the light. He paused, letting the words sink in. Clara Vane was murdered. The Peacocks were poisoned. These are not random cruelties, they are acts of design. And design, mes amis, always reveals its creator. Sir Reginald scowled. Get on with it, Poirot. Enough theatrics. Poirot inclined his head. Mais oui, monsieur. The truth, then. Allow me to explain. The pattern of the birds first. The peacocks, Poirot continued. They were poisoned with diluted arsenic. Enough to agitate them, not kill outright. Why? Because their cries unsettled the household, creating an atmosphere of dread. Each death was staged as a symbol, feathers scattered deliberately. The murderer used the birds as rehearsal, and as distraction. He turned, his gaze sweeping across the room. But rehearsal for what? For murder. Clara Vane became the first true victim. Her death bore the same signature. Scratches upon her arm, feathers strewn at her side. It was staged to resemble the work of the cat of chaos. But chaos, mes amis, is never so neat. Only human hands could weave such symbolism. The brooch, the velvet. The note Poirot lifted the peacock feather brooch between two fingers. This, discovered in the aviary, claimed by Lady Eleanor. Yet the clasp was torn proof, it was snatched, not lost. Then there is the scrap of velvet, found lodged in the beams. Fine material, from evening attire, not a servant's garb. He held up the crumpled note. Meet me at the aviary, midnight. Clara Vane went there believing in a secret tryst or revelation. Instead, she met her death, who lured her, the one who feared what she had seen or what she might reveal. The witness of the cat. A murmur rippled through the guests as the black cat slipped silently into the room, curling itself on the rug, as though it had been listening all along. Poirot gestured delicately. Our feline friend was no killer, but a witness. It prowled where it sensed unease, where secrets were hidden. Always, it led us to truth, the aviary, the feathers, the poison feed. And last night, it carried to me the note meant for Clara. Even the cat points its paw at the guilty. The unmasking Poirot's eyes rested on Julian Marsh, who paled visibly under the detective's gaze. It is you, monsieur, Poirot said softly, but firmly. Julian Marsh, the artist. You poisoned the birds. You lured Clara Vane. You staged the feathers. And you nearly escaped detection. Julian's sketchbook slipped from his trembling hands. That's absurd, he stammered. I adored Clara. Poirot raised a finger. Nong, you feared her. For Clara, vain and talkative, had discovered your secret. You were deeply in debt, were you not? Gambling, failed commissions. You sought Sir Reginald's patronage, hoped for his wealth to rescue you. But Clara knew, and she threatened to expose you. Julian's face drained of colour. No, yes, Poirot pressed, his voice gaining steel. So you silenced her. You left the note, drew her to the aviary, and poisoned her drink beforehand with the same arsenic you tested on the birds. The scratches on her arm, a staged distraction. You even placed feathers beside her to friend the cat. But you overlooked one thing, the brooch. In your struggle with Clara, you tore it from her gown and dropped it in your flight. Later, you returned to the aviary to continue your experiments with poison just as I saw last night. Julian's hands shook. You have no proof. Poirot's moustache twitched. Au contraire. The velvet scrap torn from your jacket. The powder stains on your fingers, hidden by your sketching charcoal. And your obsession with the cat, always sketching it, always pointing us to it. A guilty conscience seeks distraction. You tried to make the cat your scapegoat, but instead, it became your betrayer. Confession. Julian slumped into his chair, his face ashen. I didn't mean to kill her, he whispered hoarsely. She laughed at me, said she'd tell everyone I was a fraud, a beggar in borrowed clothes. I only wanted to frighten her, to silence her for a while. But she struggled, and then his voice broke. Silence followed, heavy and final. Lady Eleanor covered her face with her hands. Sir Reginald muttered something about disgrace. Violet's eyes were steady, though tinged with sorrow. Colonel Arbuthnot swore under his breath. Poirot spread his hands. And there you have it. The mystery is solved. The cat among the peacocks was never the black creature in the garden. It was you, Monsieur Marsh, you, the intruder who stalked among beauty, hiding claws behind art. Epilogue. Later that day, the authorities took Julian Marsh away. The manor began to breathe again, though the shadow of tragedy lingered. The peacocks resumed their strutting, their cries less haunting now, though they would forever remind the Whitcombes of that grim chapter. On the terrace, Poirot and Hastings watched the cat stretch lazily in the sun. You know, Poirot, Hastings said thoughtfully, I half think that animal was your partner in the case. Poirot smiled, stroking his moustache. Perhaps, Hastings, though cats, unlike men, do not concern themselves with justice. They seek only truth in their own way. And sometimes, it is enough. He rose, casting one last glance at the shimmering birds across the lawns. Come, mon ami, our work here is finished. The murderer has played his final bow, and the stage is clear once more. As they departed, The black cat leapt gracefully onto the balustrade, its green eyes glinting in the sunlight. It gave one last cry, a sound neither mournful nor eerie, but curiously triumphant. The case of the cat among the peacocks had reached its close, yet its echoes would linger long though the culprit was taken away. The grand estate of Peacock Manor, once a stage for vanity and elegance, had revealed itself as a stage for secrets, betrayals, and murder. But such was often the way, Poirot reflected. Beneath beauty, there was always shadow, and within silence, there was always a whisper of truth. Julian Marsh, the artist whose ambitions had outweighed his morality, sat broken and defeated when the authorities carried him away. His talent for sketching could not disguise his talent for deceit. He had imagined himself clever, sprinkling feathers, weaving symbols, casting suspicion upon a harmless black cat. Yet murder, Poirot knew, was never an art. It was a flaw, a weakness, a desperate attempt to control what could never truly be controlled. And like all weaknesses, it betrayed its owner in the smallest of details: the torn velvet, the dropped brooch, the nervous sketches that mirrored his guilt. Lady Eleanor, proud and dignified, had watched her household unravel with quiet grief. The manner she once ruled with elegance would now forever be shadowed by scandal. For though Poirot had restored order, no detective, no matter how brilliant, could restore innocence. So Reginald, too, would carry his scars. His bluster, his insistence on control, had been no shield against the reality that under his roof, murder had thrived. His pride would survive, perhaps, but it would be tempered by shame. And what of Violet? Silent, observant Violet, who had seen more than she spoke. She alone among the guests seemed to understand Poirot's words when he declared, "The cat among the peacocks was never the black creature in the garden, it was the murderer, disguised among beauty, waiting to strike. Perhaps, in time, Violet would inherit Peacock Manor. If she did, she would inherit not only the lands and the birds, but also the lessons written in shadow, that vanity, secrecy, and arrogance always carry their price." As for Poirot himself, he took no triumph in the conclusion. To him, each solved case was not victory, but balance restored. Murder was chaos, an intrusion upon the natural order. His work, his duty, was to restore that order with precision, to ensure that truth emerged polished and undeniable. He did not savour the downfall of Julian Marsh, but he savoured the knowledge that justice had not been fooled by theatrics. Hastings, ever loyal, had watched in awe once more as Poirot unravelled the threads others had dismissed as meaningless. To Hastings, the case would remain a story of eerie cries in the night, of haunting feathers scattered like omens, and of a black cat that seemed to know more than any human. To Poirot, however, it was simply another reminder that in every puzzle, no matter how elaborate, there lies a simple truth waiting to be uncovered. The black cat, that silent witness to it all, continued to prowl the grounds of Peacock Manor. Some would call it an omen, a creature of superstition, but Poirot, ever practical, saw in its only instinct the animal's natural ability to notice what others ignored. In its own way, the cat had been a detective too, guiding Poirot to the aviary, to the note, to the clues hidden in plain sight. And so, when Poirot departed, he gave the cat a final nod of respect. "Merci, mon petit," he murmured softly. "You, too, have played your part." The peacocks, once symbols of pride and beauty, strutted once again across the lawns. Their cries still rang through the estate, but now they carried a different weight. No longer were they mistaken for omens of doom, they were reminders of the truth that had been brought to light. Their feathers gleamed in the sunlight, no longer symbols of vanity, but of survival. For though men had sought to use them as props in a play of murder, the birds endured, untouched by human weakness. And so Hercule Poirot, neat and precise as always, took his leave of Peacock Manor. His suitcase was packed, his shoes polished, his moustache immaculate. As the motor car carried him and Hastings down the winding road, Poirot gazed out across the countryside with quiet satisfaction. Another mystery solved, Another murderer unmasked, another balance restored. Yet Poirot knew, as he always did, that there would be another case, another shadow lurking behind elegance, another crime disguised beneath beauty. And when it came, he would be ready. For the world, Poirot believed, was full of peacock screechers who dazzled with their feathers, who strutted with vanity, and among them there would always be a cat, silent, dangerous, waiting to strike. But as long as Hercule Poirot lived, there would also be truth, and truth, once found, could never be hidden again.